is about left versus right, understanding our two-party system. This course will go over why we only have two main political parties, their origin, as well as the composite of members from both respective parties. We will be discussing the founding principles of each party and how they have changed in present times. We'll be reading various Democratic and Republican platforms from the years, and we'll be comparing and contrasting both. In addition, this course will feature both a variety of local Democratic and Republican guest speakers, whether these people are politicians, experts on the presidency or politics, or experts on running various campaigns and strategy for both parties. We'll be reading excerpts from both left and right-wing pundits' books, as well as watching a variety of interviews on respective television channels. I'm really excited about this course because I feel like it's a great way to understand our two-party system and understand why we have a two-party system. Why do we have only Republican and Democratic presidents in the history of our nation? And will there ever be a time where we might see a third party? One thing I really want to stress about this class is that even though we're going to be reading literature from different biases, this isn't a propaganda. This isn't saying one party's bad, one party's good. We're examining both parties from an objective academic standpoint, and we're really going to have the opportunity to see what makes each party tick and how these parties have evolved. One thing that is really interesting is if you look at the Democratic or Republican platform from 20 years ago, it's completely different. Both parties have evolved so much and have changed over the years. And we could also talk about the future of both parties and how they might change. So, for example, Republicans, are we going to see them, trying to embrace diversity more and trying to reach out to the Latino population or, the African American population? What can we see these next few years? So some books that we're going to be reading and are compiled in our reading list. One is Still the Best Hope, Why the World Needs American Values to Triumph by Dennis Prager. And Prager is an outspoken conservative. He has his own conservative talk radio show. He's often on Fox News. So this is definitely a very right-wing book. But what's also interesting is that Prager talks a lot about the composite and what is typical to see in a democratic leaning society and what we can expect to see in individuals who align themselves with the Democratic Party. So while this is very biased and while his depictions might not be completely accurate, it's a very interesting read, and it also talks a lot about the history of our country, American values, and just helps us give a really broad understanding of this nation. Another book we're going to be reading on the Republican side is Mitt Romney's book, No Apology, Believe in America. I chose this book in lieu of Romney's campaign. I thought, because he was the front runner in the GOP, he represents, what the GOP is currently moving towards and where they were. So I thought his book would be a really interesting read. And his book talks about American greatness, and again, why we need American values to triumph. Romney also talks about his plans to restore economic prosperity and rebuild the country, and his personal values for how he believes he can make America strong. And then on the Democratic side, we have Dreams from My Father from Barack Obama. And this is the other reason I chose this is because Barack Obama is obviously the main Democratic frontrunner. He's the main figurehead for the Democratic Party, just as Mitt Romney was for the Republicans. And I've actually read this book. I found it very interesting. I thought it was really interesting reading about his life journey and how he became to be the person he is today. It's just a story of that American dream, and he is right now the chief example of the American dream. And then another book that I thought was really interesting, and this is by Chris Mooney, is called The Republican Brain: The Science of Why They Deny Science and Reality. Now, I have not read this, so I look forward to reading it in this class, and definitely skimming through a few chapters. With global warming and climate change, and evolution and all those other science-based topics going on right now in politics, I thought this would be a really interesting read, because we definitely see the Republican Party not really embracing global warming, evolution, and many other environmental concerns. We see them pushing for drilling on American soil, as well as, other not so environmentally friendly stances. So I thought this would be a really interesting read to see why that is the case. And then, in addition to the books that we'll be reading, we're going to be watching a lot of different media. We're going to be watching interviews from prominent Republicans and Democrats, and then we'll also be talking about people who, were in each party and seemed a little exiled from it. So one example which I love to talk about is Jon Huntsman. He was running in the Republican primary in 2012. And he had a lot of criticism for the party. He thought it needed to do a lot of soul searching. And he went from supposedly being the keynote speaker for the RNC in Tampa to being uninvited, and coincidentally was in China that weekend. So he's a really outspoken critic, and he makes some very interesting, powerful arguments. We're also going to be watching Jon Stewart on CNN's Crossfire. I am relatively familiar with Crossfire just because I have a mutual distaste for Tucker Carlson, and I really enjoyed Stewart's performance on the show. Stewart's main point in this clip is that the endless left versus right, the partisan bickering doesn't really get us anywhere, and I found that very interesting. And then we're also going to be reading some different articles. We're going to be comparing the 2012 GOP platform to the 2012 DNC platform, as well as the GOP platform from 1980 compared to the platform from 2012. And this is really interesting because the GOP platform from 1980 looks like the DNC platform now. I mean, it's just a complete flip-flop. And then we'll also be talking about some popular third-party candidates. So we'll be talking about Ralph Nader, Ross Perot, Ron Paul, and to some degree Rand Paul, and other third-party politicians. So we'll be, watching some select interviews from there and reading some literature. We'll also talk about crossing party lines and some famous politicians who, have started out on one side and then moved over to the other side. Or have started out as independents and then moved over to one party or the other. So I really look forward to this class, and I also look forward to talking about different parties here in the United States. Another thing that we'll be talking about is we'll be going through each party in the United States and talking about the founding principles and what is the general composite of members of those parties. So Libertarians, Green Party, Pink Party, Constitution Party, even the Communist Party, which still exists today. We'll be talking about all of these parties and what makes up them. And then as well as that, as we'll be talking about general characteristics of the Republican and the Democratic parties. So, for example, and this is super generalized, but these are just some things that we've seen in the past few years that the Democratic Party has advocated for. Increased regulations on businesses, higher taxes for the top percentage of Americans, as well as corporations, campaign finance reform, increased social services and more programs to protect and help the poor and the middle class, rights for LGBT people, green energy, and then as well as pro-choice and the right of women to choose, a lot of women's rights, limits on our military programs and national defense, higher minimum wage, increased public transportation, immigration reform, and affordable health care. And these are just some issues that we've seen recently. Obviously